back to the Graham Stephan Show. So as a landlord myself, somebody sent me this video and told me to react to it. And right off the bat, I could tell you it's going to be a juicy one. The title is, Are Landlords Really That Bad? So, of course, we're going to watch this video. I'll give you my own thoughts, and chances are, I don't know what I'm up against. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure to subscribe. Hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm because it does help me out tremendously. And now I'm going to be in for it. Let's see what this is all about.
Let's get something out of the way. We on the left have this revolting tendency that I want to steer clear of entirely for this sensitive and important topic. I am genuinely appalled, and frankly, I simply don't understand why some so-called leftists feel it's okay to make fun of landlords. It's unacceptable. Might I remind you that landlords live paycheck to paycheck? Your paycheck, sure, but still.
Oh, I can tell already he does not like landlords. This is not going to be a positive video for me, but you know what? I'm going to go in with an open mind. I'm going to put everything aside and look at this rationally to determine just how bad I actually am. Let's keep going.
Rent in the US has gone up at a rate of 18% over the last 5 years alone, and almost 150% since 1985.
Okay, but is that the landlord's fault though, or is it just a constricted housing supply because they don't allow you to build that many homes? The way I see it is that you could point to houses and say, oh, you know, houses went up in value, but what about gas prices? What about food? What about everything else? What about utilities? There are so many other things that also cost more money that are not being mentioned here, but of course, it's housing that's the biggest topic here, so we'll continue.
Landlords can be awful, and landlords can be chill. There's truly every flavor of landlord out there. Not that I'm suggesting we should eat them, of course.
I don't think it tastes very good. I would imagine well, first of all, you'd probably get a lot of caffeine because I like coffee. Now for sale, by the way, at bankrollcoffee.com. But yeah, I wouldn't be delicious. So anybody thinking of eating me, just don't do it.
Generally speaking, landlording is a form of rent-seeking behavior. That's pretty obvious given the fact that the thing we give landlords is literally called rent. But let's actually go over what rent-seeking means for a second. Landlords, like all rent seekers, make money based not on any work they do, or in exchange for producing anything of value, but on the simple fact that they own something necessary.
No, that's completely false. See, most people don't understand all the work that goes on to maintaining a property, buying the property, taking on the risk that the property could go down in value. There's so many things behind the scene that a tenant doesn't really see, including the fact that there's a lot of maintenance, repairs that goes into that, property taxes, insurance, and then you're coming up with the capital to buy the property to begin with. So I do think there can be certain circumstances where landlords try to cut corners, but for the most part, they're providing a service just like anything else. Just like you're able to go and rent a U-Haul or put something on a credit card and then pay it back. I mean, there's so many other things that this applies to. I don't like how it's just singled out that a landlord does nothing, because as any landlord will tell you, there's a lot of work that goes on.
They do not add anything to society, but they do accumulate wealth. Normally, accumulating wealth is something that's only supposed to happen when you produce wealth. Something that happens when people work. Taking thing A and, through varying processes, turning it into thing B, which is worth more, for example. That's what creates value in a society, and landlords just don't do that.
Yeah, they do though. I mean, the thing is, when a property is sold, the property tax basis is based on the new price, which, property values generally tend to go up. So they're paying a higher property tax value, which means more money back to the city. Insurance premiums are also being paid for, repairs, maintenance, landscaping. I mean, buying a property will probably employ anywhere from 3 to 5 people every single year who come out to work on that property. So saying they don't add anything is just a pretty false statement. Not to mention, a lot of landlords will go and fix up a property to be able to rent it for more. So in a sense, they're improving on a property that otherwise has been not cared for or dilapidated or just neglected. So there is some value to be added there.
A landlord doesn't actively produce anything for society, or at least they don't need to. You, in contrast, most likely do. In your role as a worker, you probably transform some raw material into something else, or you provide a service to someone, or you create something for others to use or enjoy, or you're currently pursuing some kind of education or training and will do one of those things soon.
The negative thing is that this really only provides one side of a narrative that's extremely warped, and I feel like a lot of people who watch this just want to believe that there's someone to blame. They're upset that wages have not kept up with inflation, that property values have gone through the roof, and instead of looking at the fact that our policies are broken, that zoning requirements are really flawed, it's easier to say,
it's the landlord's fault. It's because this person bought this this property and they're bad.
And I feel like that, unfortunately, doesn't do much help in actually solving the situation, which I personally believe we need to build more housing. Flat out, housing prices are going up because there's not as much of it. And the reason it's so expensive is because the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to 0%. So it's like they're throwing free money out there for people who take advantage of that, for people that then go and buy real estate, which drives up the price. I mean, it's policies which have created this to begin with.
Without you, there would be no economy to speak of. Natural resources would stay in the ground.
Yeah, but you're forgetting too how a landlord is even able to get the money to buy the property to begin with. It's not like someone is just born and they just happen to win the genetic lottery and like make millions of dollars and be like,
Oh, I'm just gonna buy real estate and do nothing.
a lot of times those landlords have done a significant amount of work, have saved money, have done something to society to be able to purchase the property to begin with. And I'm not talking about like trust fund kids, inheritances, stuff like that. Because studies have shown that more than 80% of millionaires are completely self-made. So those are people who have produced something in society to then go and buy a property, not necessarily someone who's done no work at all ever.
Landlords will often say something like, well, landlords provide housing. The idea being that this is some kind of service landlords are doing, and if we didn't have landlords, where would people get their homes? Where would they live? Where would they sleep? Where would they plug in their PS5s? Some other outlet? Don't be ridiculous. And this is an almost coherent argument, assuming you flat out ignore that the housing is there already. Other people did the work. It's done.
Yeah, but who's going to come up to buy that property? The thing is, there's a large segment of people who either don't want to buy or they don't have the finances to buy. And in a lot of areas too, it's actually cheaper to rent the property than it is to buy. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, 99% of properties on the market make absolutely no sense as a rental. There's just not enough room to make that a good use of capital. So it just doesn't make sense. So there's only a small subset of properties out there that actually do make a good rental where it makes sense to rent it out. But again, we'll continue. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm surprised that he's not mentioning the stock investors. I mean, if we're talking about someone who really is taking the most passive approach as possible, housing's not it. If you want to address someone who's not really doing much, it's someone who buys an S&P 500 index fund. You're doing nothing with your capital except reinvesting it back into the markets, which is entirely dictated by supply and demand. But no, landlords, they're the bad ones.
On average, landlords in the US make $97K a year. In other words, more than double the average renter's income.
Yeah, but that's because they have supplemental income. I mean, the thing with landlording is that they're not making $97,000 a year renting out properties. Most of the landlords happen to have normal jobs, just like anybody else. They probably happen to pay more to be able to buy the property in the first place, which skews the results. I'm sure homeowners also tend to be, on average, older, which would absolutely skew those results. And I bet this is bogged down as well by a lot of college-age, younger, or even people in their 30s and 40s who are renting, versus someone who's been in the workforce way longer, able to make more money, that accumulates, they're able to compound that interest, and so it's not exactly a black and white comparison to take someone who's probably 60 years old and comparing that to a renter who's maybe 20 or 30.
If the landlord could buy the house in the first place, it's because it was already on sale somewhere, meaning that anyone could buy it themselves. Therefore, landlords interrupt the process of housing going from producer to user. They take a one-step process and complicate it.
Listen, I have to say, as a landlord, that is completely false. I hate, and I'm sure every other investor would agree with me, you do not want to compete to buy a single-family rental property and compete with someone who's going to buy it for themselves and live in it. It just doesn't work because for you to make a return on your investments, you have to pay a price that is lower than what anyone else is willing to pay. Because if I'm going in, I'm buying a property for myself, I don't need to care about,
How much can I rent this out for and how does this compare?
You're buying it for yourself. So generally, people who buy houses for themselves pay more than someone who's buying it for a rental. And because of that, landlords are not going to get the same deals. Landlords will usually go for the properties that are dilapidated, need repair, in areas where just people don't want to buy. And if they're competing with an owner-user, most of the time, they're going to lose. It just doesn't make sense.
Then there's the fact that a mortgage isn't even guaranteed. Banks will frequently deny people a $500 a month mortgage if they think they're too risky, blaming a low credit score. But of course, see no problem letting that same person continue paying $1,000 a month in rent. Most landlords know this too. and will take advantage of their good relationship with the bank thanks to their privileged financial status.
Well, a lot of that is because the banks don't want to have all the risk when they issue a loan. They need a down payment, knowing that in the event something happens, they have something to foreclose on and get their money back. The banks are not in the business of losing money. So if they think that a borrower is risky, they don't want to be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, for a landlord accepting a tenant to the exact same price, usually their downside risk is a lot lower than a bank. And that's the reason why. But yes, in general, if you're spending $1,000 a month and you intend to be there for at least 10 years, it's probably better to buy than it is to rent.
Then, on top of all this, there's the landlords who don't use this clever passing the buck trick with their mortgages, and whose rent checks are pure profit. Just as an example, 45% of landlords in the UK have no outstanding mortgages whatsoever. Every cent you send their way goes directly in their pockets.
Yes, because a lot of the time, people have owned a property for more than 30 years. And what ends up happening is that they buy a property, they raise a family there, they're eventually able to pay their mortgage off in 30 years, and then what do? They'll move somewhere else, but they'll keep the property and then rent it out to supplement their retirement. That's why so many properties are completely paid off, because they've owned them for such a long time. Now, obviously, too, there are some inheritances out there, and people pass down their properties, but at the same time, the savvy landlords out there are usually mortgaging themselves as much as they can to take advantage of low interest rates. So the paid off properties are not exactly the types that he's referring to here.
If you don't like renting because it's exploitative and rent-seeking, and you can't afford your own place because staggeringly few people can, the only option left is homelessness. And homelessness, apart from being one of the most brutal, crushing situations a human being can experience,
that just went from one extreme to another. It's either, you can't buy a house or you're homeless. There are, I gotta say, you might not be in the best of areas, but like living with roommates, moving a little bit further from work. I've seen a lot of circumstances where, even in expensive cities, you're able to get rent at a fairly affordable price. Just as an example, okay? Let's go to Craigslist. If you're in Los Angeles, you can get the main bedroom in a shared apartment for $1,200. We have a Hollywood apartment for $850. There's quite a few options here that are not the $2,200 median rent that a lot of people see. The downside, sure, you're gonna have to live with a roommate, but at the end of the day, you're able to save a lot of money if you're able to do that.
landlords know this is the alternative. And they know that if you complain, they can always call the sheriff and have you evicted, violently pushing you out of your home and closer to the terrifying possibility of becoming homeless.
No, it's not that simple at all. My gosh, as someone who's been through one eviction, one kind of eviction, but man, the process is not easy. You can't just make a phone call and be like,
Hey, my tenant didn't pay rent. Kick him out.
oh man, no. The legal process could take anywhere from a few months to sometimes a year, during at which point usually the tenant's not paying any rent whatsoever, and that's a loss that falls back on the landlord, and you can't collect anything from a tenant who stops paying, because what is there to collect? Usually if the tenant stops paying, they don't have anything to come after anyway, so they just choose to stay there completely rent-free. And listen, I don't put it past them. If they're in that position, what are they gonna do? So, I'm not blaming them for that. I bet a lot of people would do the exact same thing, but I'm just saying, the process for eviction is expensive. It often costs thousands of dollars. It then takes another several $1,000s to get the place re-rentable. Sometimes it could be $10,000, $15,000, depending on what it needs.
Every lease you've ever had has been signed under duress. While you technically have the freedom to choose what landlord you sign a lease with, most people do not have the freedom to not sign a lease at all.
No, I think that's a stretch to say every lease agreement is signed under duress. It's just like any other contract that you would sign, like your utility provider. It's like, oh no, that was signed under duress because you need electricity, you need the phone payment, you need all of these other things. And sure, housing, definitely something that's essential, but leaving a lot of stuff out here.
Housing is probably the best thing you can put your money in if you have it. The reason that's true is that the demand for housing is inelastic at the individual level. We all need to be housed. It is a non-negotiable condition of living. That means that those who control the supply, landlords, can create artificial scarcity to jack up the prices.
No, it's not. Again, all of this is so stupid. You have housing markets that also decline in value. Who takes that loss? Is the tenant ever responsible when the landlord loses money? No. The reason why housing tends to be such a good investment for so many people is because it acts like a forced savings account. When you pay your mortgage, a portion of that mortgage pays down your loan and thereby increases home equity. And for a lot of people who saved nothing, the best thing that they could do is just pay off a mortgage, and then after 30 years, their housing is taken care of. That's why it's such a good investment.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans, whether they know it or not, are renting from Wall Street. For-profit firms, as opposed to individual investors, control around 45% of the housing supply. Renting from Wall Street comes with aggressive rent hikes, fee gouging, and high rates of eviction. This is because investors have found that although tenant turnover costs companies an average of $1,500, they can easily recover that cost through late fees, court fines, or retaining tenant security deposits. And since shareholders demand that profits consistently outpace inflation, that cost gets passed on to renters.
Yeah, a lot of those corporations, though, they buy huge multifamily apartment buildings. Like, I'm talking about the buildings that even the most successful investors are unable to purchase because it's so expensive. Those are the buildings where it makes sense for these corporations to buy them at scale, but chances are the bulk of that is not like the random property across the street.
Large, for-profit housing firms use their powerful financial position to do all sorts of cruel things. Like the stuff we've already covered, but also like stopping rent control laws that would prevent them from hiking up rents willy-nilly. In practical terms, that means using the profits made from tenants to screw tenants over even more in the future.
Oh man, the rent control laws are absolutely flawed too, because they create a system where tenants don't want to leave because once they move in, they lock into an agreement where rent can only be increased by usually 3% a year. So if rents are going up by 10% and a tenant is locked in at 3% a year, they're going to stay there. That means that there's less turnover, there's less supply on the market, and when people are just hunkering down where they are, and there's not enough housing to come on the market that's brand new, prices go up. I think if we just let the market do its thing, allowed more housing to be built, eventually there would be an equilibrium. Because if prices keep going up, it'll make sense for more landlords and developers to make more properties, to build more, to add more supply on the market, and that would bring prices down. There's got to be an equilibrium to everything. And the reason it gets screwed up is because we apply these caps on certain things, we disallow buildings to happen in the first place, and that drives up whatever's left over on the market. So there's a lot of broken problems here, but the issue that I see is not necessarily the landlord.
The other side buys up the houses that get foreclosed on. We saw this in 2008. The economy crashed due to Wall Street chasing big bucks, millions of people were foreclosed on, and Wall Street firms, still flush with cash, bought up all that housing.
Yeah, but in a way, they saved the market from falling even further. If they didn't provide a backstop to buy up all of these homes, you would see something way worse in the economy. When banks are not able to get the money, in a way, they stopped a lot of the bleeding from the market and they helped a recovery. But again, we shouldn't mention that. That's bad.
Millions of homes are vacant. Free or at least affordable housing provided with the goal of safely housing the population, not for the passive profits of those who hold housing for ransom, can be our reality.
Now, a lot of those vacant properties, though, aren't necessarily rentals. A lot of them would be second properties, vacation homes, things like this. Or flat out, they don't want to rent the home because they don't want to deal with the tenants. So a lot of that's not just landlords.
If you've watched my videos for a while, you're probably aware that YouTube doesn't treat socialist creators very well.
So overall, it seems like a very skewed, sad, unfortunate way to look at things. And, you know, unfortunately, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. Chances are, if you're watching the video, you're already of sound mind to understand the nuances of investing and, you know, the economics of supply and demand. But you know what? It's interesting to at least hear another perspective. I'm always open to hearing it. Do I agree? No. But at the same point, I'd like to make sure everyone gets heard. I'm open to hearing as many different perspectives as possible. And if you agree or disagree, feel free to comment down below. I read all the comments and I'll do my best to respond. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, feel free to add me on Instagram. Do it. Enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.